the Brittonic languages, insular languages. You might want to just think about these regional languages in your own mother tongue, because obviously in German or Spanish or even French, you probably don't talk about Manx or Cornish very much. I mentioned 3 Irish provinces. Just Irish names like my name are very difficult to pronounce, so just do your best. So Ulster, Munster and Connacht. I then mentioned the Gaeltacht, which are Irish-speaking areas. The potato famine, which I'm sure you all know about in the 19th century. I talk about republicanism, which I explain, and unionism, which I also explain, and I'm sure you know Duolingo. And yeah, Victor has started us off with an Irish word, sláinte, which is cheers, or also health. So, okay, so without further ado, I'll get started. Yeah, okay. So, as I was saying, good afternoon, everyone. This is my last speech at WISE, my second speech and last speech, and it's also the last session I'm going to participate in because I have to leave a little bit early today. But as Rachel said, I'd like to thank all the organizers, Joe and Jose. It's my second time doing WISE, and it was a bit strange doing it online this time, but it was also a very useful exercise once again. So as we all know, we've been going through strange times over the past few months, this whole coronavirus and lockdown period. And I know it was a very difficult time for a lot of people, especially people with underlying health conditions and people who were living in very difficult situations, maybe with a violent partner or in a home that they didn't like, that they didn't feel comfortable in. But personally, and I think probably like most of you, I found it to be quite a good time to kind of reset my system and to be able to learn new skills, and also to be able to pick up some old skills, to be able to go back and explore things that I enjoyed in the past or that I learned in the past. And one of those things was the Irish language for me. So I've spoken to most of you already, and you probably know that I'm from Northern Ireland. And you probably know a little bit about the political situation in Northern Ireland, that it's a slightly complicated place where there are these two identities kind of battling each other out. But I'll come on to that a little bit later. So most Irish people, both north and south of the border, have a slightly complicated relationship with the Irish language. And I'll explain that in this speech in more detail. So I went back and started learning the Irish language a little bit. Again, I did it for 3 years at school. And to be honest, I didn't like it at school. I studied French and I had very inspirational French teachers. And I didn't have very inspirational Irish teachers. Maybe if I'd had a teacher who'd sort of taken me under the wing and really gave me a passion for the language, then I would have continued learning, but I really didn't. So before I start talking about the Irish language in more detail and why there is this complicated relationship between the Irish people and their mother tongue, I'll discuss some facts and figures related to Irish. So first of all, no surprise, Irish is a Celtic language. And the Celtic languages branch off into 2 different types of languages, 2 different groups of languages. There are the so-called Brittonic Celtic languages, which are Welsh, Breton, and Cornish. So the languages spoken in Wales, Brittany, and Cornwall. And then there are the so-called insular Celtic languages. So Irish is one of these. Scottish Gaelic is another, and Manx, the language spoken on the Isle of Man, the small island between Ireland and Great Britain. And just to remind you, you might know this already, we don't tend to call Irish Gaelic. When I hear someone referring to the language as Gaelic, I know they're not from Ireland. We tend to call it the Irish language. And in Ireland, it's called Gaelic, and in Scotland, it's usually called Gaelic. So there's a bit of a difference there, but usually the normal term is Irish. So the Irish language is the national and official language of the Republic of Ireland, and it's also a regional or minority language in Northern Ireland. And it's been an official language of the European Union since 2007, And because I work for the European Commission, I can maybe give you some more information about Ireland, the role of the Irish language in the European Union a little bit later, because that's something which is changing as well, because of some other events, which you might be able to guess what they are. Irish is spoken by 140,000 people as a mother tongue, and this is mainly in special protected Irish-speaking areas called Gaeltacht, and they are found mainly on the west coast of Ireland. And then, according to the census, it's also spoken by 1.7 million people as a second language. So if you go to Ireland, the Republic of Ireland in particular, you'll see that all the signs are bilingual, all laws and official documents are available in Irish as well as English. In the Republic of Ireland, people learn Irish for a long time at school. They learn it pretty much from the beginning of secondary school until the end of secondary school. So they learn it for a number of years, anywhere between sort of 7 and 10 years. But if you speak to a lot of Irish people, they can't actually express themselves in Irish. They speak English with an Irish accent, obviously, but they don't speak Irish particularly well. So I want to explore why this is. And I think one of the biggest reasons is the English language. I'm not going to go into history. I'm not going to talk about the British occupation of Ireland and the potato famine and all of this. This is a topic that's been rehashed time and time again. I'm not one of these Irish people who's bitter about the past. We've got to move forward. But we have to say that all this history and all this background and all this baggage has had an impact on the Irish language. As we all know, English is a world language. I personally think English has been quite good. The English language has been quite good for Ireland because we're now an island in Europe, an English-speaking enclave in the European Union. Now that Brexit has happened, it's much safer maybe for American businesses to invest in Ireland than in the UK. And there's been a lot of inward investment in Ireland. Big American technology companies have set up, pharmaceutical companies. So I think it's been a very positive thing for Ireland, the English language. And I can say this as a native English speaker, and probably the people in the English booth will agree with me on this. Native English speakers are very lazy when it comes to learning other languages. We know that. Everyone speaks English in inverted commas. We know that we can go anywhere in the world and be understood. So why bother learning Irish when everyone speaks English, everyone understands English? I can travel around the world speaking English, so why would I bother learning this other language? Now, here I need to be very careful with terminology, because in Ireland, the Irish language is never known as a foreign language. You can never say, oh yes, I'm learning foreign languages, I'm learning French, German, and Irish. No. Irish is usually referred to as a second language or another language, but never a foreign language, because it is the main language, and constitutionally speaking, it's one of the two languages of Ireland. So, I think I'll use this as my halfway point, so the interpreters may want to switch. I'll give you a few moments. So that's the first reason. The English language is dominant, and really that has had an impact on the success of the Irish language. The second reason is that Irish is a complicated language. It's complex in terms of word order. So English and French, Spanish are what are called SVO languages, subject, verb, object languages. So that means the subject comes first, then the verb, then the object. So I eat an apple, for example, would be an example of subject, verb, object. I, the subject, eat, the verb, the apple is the object. However, Irish is a VSO language. That means that you start with the verb, then the subject, then the object. So you would say, eat I the apple. So that's something that's a little bit different, that the word order is complicated. The pronunciation is very difficult, as you'll have seen from a number of Irish names, including my own. We have a lot of vowels. We have a lot of words and, a lot of letters that aren't pronounced, or two letters that go together to pronounce a completely different sound. So that's complicated as well. There are some very complicated grammatical rules. I haven't given you these, I don't think, I'm afraid, but I'll tell you what they are very quickly. There's something called elision and lenition. But all you need to know is that they're very complicated, and it basically changes the spelling of a word depending on its role in a sentence. So, for example, if you put a preposition in front of a word, it changes the first letter of some words. So that's quite complicated as well. Personally, re-exploring Irish a little bit, especially having learned German, I find that it is very complicated, but it's also very consistent. So in English, we don't have many grammar rules, but we have loads of exceptions. Whereas with Irish, I've found, a little bit like German, there are lots and lots of rules, but they're very consistent. Once you learn the rule, you can apply it pretty much across the board. So I've quite enjoyed the grammatical and linguistic challenge of learning Irish. So that's all about the language itself. Now I'd like to move on to the image of the Irish language in Ireland, North and South. So as I said, I'm from Northern Ireland, and sadly, the Irish language has often been associated with certain political movements, like the Republican movement. Now here, I'm not talking about Republican in the American sense of the term. I'm not talking about George Bush or Donald Trump. Republicanism is the movement to reunify Ireland. So any of you who were alive and around in the 1990s, as most of you were, you'll know that in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, this led to violence, and there were a number of terrorist organizations on both sides of the divide. But probably the best known one is the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. And they led a terror campaign, blowing up buildings, killing prominent people. And a lot of their slogans were in Irish. So their big slogan was, "Our day will come," which I'll say in Irish, but you don't have to say it in Irish. Chucky Arla, Chucky Arla, our day will come. That basically meant that one day we will be reunified with our brothers in the South. And sadly, this association between republicanism and the Irish language has somewhat tarnished the reputation of the Irish language in Northern Ireland. And of course, like everything in Northern Ireland, it's all very political, and it leads to this resentment between Republicans who want the reunification of Ireland and Unionists who want Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. And then in the Republic of Ireland, there's something quite different. In the Republic of Ireland, the Irish language is seen as being something very middle class. So if you're from a nice family, a nice middle class family, you send your children to Irish language schools, because you know at Irish language schools, your children will be with other nice middle class children, and they'll learn the Irish language, and they won't have to deal with any what we call riffraff in English, so kind of lower class people. And more importantly, for some Irish people, they won't have to be in the same class as migrants, because since the European Union expanded in 2004, Ireland has become home to a number of large Polish and Lithuanian communities. Personally, I think it's very good. I think it's good for a small country like Ireland to be shaken up a little bit and to have a bit of diversity. But for some people, that was just not a good thing at all, because it meant that their children, if they went along to school, an English language school, the classes would have to be held back for these foreigners who didn't speak English properly. So I've heard this argument from people in the Republic of Ireland, and personally, it really gets on my nerves, as you might be able to tell from my tone. Then the final reason why I think the Irish language is complex and why it's difficult to learn for Irish people is that there's really an emphasis on difference and on dialects. So like most languages, Irish has different dialects. There are three main dialects: the one spoken in the north, where I'm from, the Ulster dialect, the one spoken in the west, in Connacht, and then the one spoken in the southwest, in Munster. Now, when you go to school, when I was at school, for example, we only learned the Ulster dialect, the northern dialect. We were never told, oh yes, by the way, in the west, this word is pronounced whatever way, or in the southwest, they tend to say something instead of saying something else. We were never taught that. So I always thought that the way I spoke Irish, or the way I learned Irish, was just universal, that everyone would understand me. And so there's very little standardization. And I found, as a northerner, that I often get mocked if I try to pronounce anything in Irish. People will say, oh, no, that's not how you say it. That's not proper. So there's a sort of hierarchy of dialects. So it's quite frustrating. I really wish that people would just come together, like with English. If I speak to someone from New Zealand or from Canada, I'm not going to say, no, we don't say it that way. That's not correct. You respect another person's dialect. And that's why English has been such a success as a world language. So there are lots of frustrations here, as you can probably tell from my tone of voice, but there is some hope on the horizon. And one source of hope has been technology. There's a very active Twitter community in Irish, the Irish language. Lots of people tweet in Irish. There are lots of modern teaching methods now. For example, you can learn Irish on Duolingo. I did an online course for Irish during lockdown. And the European Union has also played a role because Ireland is obviously a member state of the European Union. The UK has left the European Union. And Ireland had something called a derogation, so an exception. It meant that the Irish language didn't have to be used in meetings, or that Ireland said that they didn't want interpretation from or into Irish. But that could change. This derogation is reaching the end of its term. It's going to run out, I think, in the early 2020s, 2022, I believe. And from then on, Irish may be spoken as both an active and a passive language in many EU meetings. So it means we may be hearing more Irish in the EU institutions as well. So watch this space for the future of the Irish language. I think with technology and the European Union, we may be hearing more and more Irish over time, but there's still a lot of work to do to make it a common language for a lot of Irish people. I think the English language will still be predominant for many years to come. So, Gora Maichagiv, and that means thank you very much. And thank you very much for organizing this event, and have a lovely day.